And when you talk to civil servants about those days after September the 11th, they will tell you, we tried to remind the government about the experience in Northern Ireland. We tried to remind the government about the lessons that had been learned. And those lessons are set forth in this book and in other works put out by the CAJ in a very accessible way. It's not as though the issues are complex. If you go through this work, you'll find that the CAJ has put together, this was in the context of a meeting to be held in Belfast by a group called the Commission of Eminent Persons, a group of distinguished lawyers from around the world who were going to make recommendations on what to do. And they chose to come to Belfast to meet different members of the community to get perspectives on what ought to be done. And the Committee on the Administration of Justice drew together the strands and put them into this book. And they reminded us that at these times of threat and challenge more than any other, you need to strengthen your commitment to the rule of law, not run away from it. You need to use the full array of techniques that are available in human rights law for protecting the rights of those who are most vulnerable. You need to stress the vital importance of due process. You need to avoid taking extraordinary measures because extraordinary measures are always open to the door of abuse. I'm reminded as I read this again for about the fifth time coming over on the plane this afternoon of a conversation that I had with a clinical psychologist who was down at Guantanamo in those first weeks and months in the summer of 2002, a wonderful man by the name of Mike Gellis. I write about him in my book, Torture Team, which is a sort of oral history of what happened at Guantanamo in the first year. It's the story of the interrogation of a single man who was thought to be the 20th hijacker, a man called Mohammed al-Qahtani, who is still at Guantanamo 8 years after having been arrested, without having been charged, cannot be charged because it's now accepted by the Bush and Obama administrations that he was tortured, but cannot be released because he is thought to be so dangerous. His lawyer tells me that he spends most of his time in a fetal position in solitary confinement in a cell. That is what we have become. That is where we have gone. We have not learned the lessons. But Mike Gellis said to me, and it resonates very much with your work, Mike, he said to me, what I learned as a clinical psychologist is that if you tell interrogators that a little bit of abuse is a good thing, they will jump to the conclusion that a little more abuse is an even better thing. And then he used this expression. He said, Philippe, the problem is once you take the dogs off the leash, you cannot put them back on. That was one of the lessons in Northern Ireland. It's been a brutal lesson in relation to the events subsequent to September the 11th. It is also very relevant, and Mike mentioned it to emphasize, as you do in your work, the connection between the domestic and the international. And I think you're not the first to make the point that when a community is struggling to ensure minimum standards of justice and due process at the national level, they reach out to the international level. You hear the same story in Chile, in Argentina, in South Africa, in parts of Central Europe, in the Balkans, and in other places of the world where, unfortunately, all of the wonderful laws that have been put in place internationally since the Second World War have not stopped the abuse. But for me, the single most important thing about your work as reflected in this book and in your other writings is on the issues of impunity and of accountability. And you have done extraordinarily important work in that area. The US stands right now at a difficult crossroads. There's no dispute that torture happened. There's no dispute that it happened systematically and on a widespread basis. Some countries, the United Kingdom, and I give real credit to this government because the last government didn't do it, have set up a judicial inquiry to look at the circumstances in which allegations of possible British complicity in torture in Pakistan, in Morocco, and in other parts of the world have occurred. And I very much welcome that effort. There is no question in my mind that the decision of the coalition government to do that was drawn from the experience in Northern Ireland. They knew that they had to deal with this now, or it would fester and fester and fester and undermine confidence and trust and building good links between different communities. The United States has not done that. President Obama, who strikes me as an absolutely admirable individual, professor of constitutional law, a deep and strong commitment to human rights, to civil rights, has said we need to move on. We will not look back to the past. We will not do truth or reconciliation. We will not do criminal justice. We will not investigate the previous administration or their lawyers for what happened. And it strikes me that that is a mistake that is going to come back to haunt him. He needs to read your book published in 2008. He needs to read the work that you and many associated with you have been so deeply engaged in the past years. It has deeply influenced my way of thinking about this. I've been to Queen's University in Belfast and talked about it. I've made a couple of other trips here and also to Dublin to talk about the issue of impunity and accountability and how to deal with the past. And the one lesson, if there is one lesson to be drawn from the Northern Ireland experience, as seen from London, it is you cannot escape the past. I was reminded of that 2 or 3 weeks ago when the Ombudsman's report came out about the events of Cloudy. Very far from my own experience, and yet the news reports, the media interviews showed that 40 years on, this was still an issue that ignited the deepest and strongest passions. And that, it seems to me, is one of the great lessons that I have learned from your work. You can't push this stuff under the rug. Now, that doesn't mean you go down the route of criminal prosecution. There are other ways of dealing with the past. It's complex. I just did an interview for the Irish Times on being here today, and he said, well, what would you tell Northern Ireland to do? I just said, it's not for me to tell Northern Ireland what to do. I think it's the first lesson one learns is that it's the community that is most directly involved that has to determine for itself how it is going to deal with the past. But the one lesson is you can't just say we're going to move on and we're going to forget what happened. Life just isn't like that. And so to wrap up, it seems to me as you move forward, coming back to a theme that I raised at the outset, your voice, Mike, and that of your wonderful colleagues resonates way beyond Belfast, way beyond the United Kingdom. And I encourage you with all the energy and passion that I can to do what you can to reach out to those other communities, including in places like the United States, including in places like the Balkans, because you have a special experience in Northern Ireland, and at the heart of that experience is the Committee on the Administration of Justice, which can help other communities around the world come to terms and come to draw from the lessons that you have learned and apply the conclusions that are right for them in the particular circumstances. So I wrap up by expressing, and I think you'll have picked it up, if not between the lines then very directly, my very deep and strong admiration for the work that the CAJ has done, is doing, I hope will continue to do, those who are associated with it now, those who have been associated with it in the past, those who have been its guiding light and its spirits. It's an admirable and extraordinary achievement. It is a wonderful credit that you now have this extraordinary space in which to develop your work, and it's truly my honour to be associated with the unveiling of this building, which will not be done with champagne. I apparently have to pull this piece of paper, which is blue tacked onto the underlying, which is blue tacked on the underlying wall. I will probably pull the wallpaper or the plaster off of the wall as I do this, but it's a special blue tack, I'm told, to maintain things in place. So, without further ado, now I've got to do this right. There's a form of words, isn't there? I hereby declare the building that hosts the Committee on the Administration of Justice open, and may all who sail with her be happy and safe and secure.